Learners, welcome back to my channel Mrs.Bio Education. In this channel, we dive into the depth of biology and talk about all small and large stuff related to biology. If this is your first video on my channel, I would suggest you go back to the part 1 of population studies video, because this video is in continuation with what we have already studied in the part 1. And if you want to understand better, then it would be better that if you see the first video. So let's dive in. We had discussed in the last video that in India the population is rising on an average of about 2,44,80,000 people per year. So that was an insane value. So now we have to understand what is affecting this growth. So for any particular population, if we are talking about India or any other population, we have to pay attention to certain factors that is affecting its growth. And here I'm just writing all the different factors. The very first factor can be fertility. Fertility is actually the ability to reproduce. So if in a population there are couples that are fertile and we have a lot of such couples, so obviously that population is going to increase very rapidly. So fertility is a point on which increase in population depends, especially if we have more fertile couples. Then how do you record the rate at which people are getting born every day? The children are getting born every day. So what we see here is called as natality. Natality or birth rate. It is actually the number of babies produced per 1,000 individual per year. And if for any country, if this data is large, it's just showing that a lot of babies are born every year, and therefore there would be an increase in the population. A very similar term to fertility is also total fertility rate. Now we have to understand the difference here. Fertility, when we were talking about the ability. But when we are talking about total fertility rate, we are actually talking about an average number of children. I repeat, an average number of children that a woman can produce in her lifetime, and it varies from region to region. And for any standard population like India, we would say this should be two children per woman, because that's kind of standard. And because I said 2, we should understand why 2 is because there's some parameter called replacement level. So for any population, its growth is affected by its replacement level. Let us understand what is replacement level. So it is the number of children a couple must produce in order to replace them in a population when they die. So we think that a couple is made up of 2 people. So obviously they should have 2 children to replace them when they die. Duh, this is so logical, but no, it's not actually. For any country, its value is always higher than 2. And that is because not all the children that are born can actually reach up to their reproductive stage. A lot of children die before that, maybe because of some genetic disorder or because of some type of casualty in accident or something. So this value, which should logically be 2, is actually always greater than 2. And for developed country, it is 2.1. For India, which is a developing country, it is 2.7. Now, very similar to the birth rate, there is another parameter which is called as mortality or the death rate. So it is just exactly opposite of the definition. In board exams, a lot of time these two are asked as differentiate between. So we have to remember that they are exactly the same. The only difference is we talk about number of deaths in mortality per 1,000 individual per year, and in natality we talk about number of birth or number of baby produced per 1,000 individual per year. So these are some of the 5 basic factors that affects the growth rate. Now we are talking about something called as age-sex structure. This, I think, by far has to do a lot with the growth. And this is something that every population has to understand so that it can limit its growth rate. Age-sex structure refers to the total number of male or female of a certain age group present in a population. So it is actually the proportion of people in a certain age group in a population. So for example, if I take a range of say 15 to 45 years, so I have to see how many males are in that range and how many females are in that range, and the ratio of 2 of them is what represents the age-sex structure. Now we have to understand that this is a very important parameter because it makes us understand how much growth will we expect in the next year, because the more number of fertile males and females or couples are present, the more would be the growth rate. So here I have put a very rough graphs that actually tells us about the age sex structure. So you can see that they all have three different shapes, but if you take a look at the one that I'm actually carving out right now and writing as developed country, look at how kind of parallel are the two boundaries. Whereas if we take a look at the first two, they have kind of like a pyramidal shape, and these are the graphs for actually developed countries. So I'm marking out down the age here. So 0 to 10 I take as pre-reproductive age, because this is the age where females and males have yet to achieve the puberty. Then above 15, like I said, 10 to 45 would be reproductive, and everything above that would be post-reproductive. We will come back to graph in a minute. Before that, we have to understand that all these 5 factors and the age sex factor contribute kind of unanimously for the growth rate. So a very interesting phenomena that we observe about, we are just talking about the graphs that we have just seen above, and that is called as a demographic transition. A demographic transition is something that we see in developed countries. It is very, very special because these countries have somehow mastered this ability to control the population, and we will understand that. But I think I missed a parameter here. To understand that better, we have to include one more parameter over here, which is called migration. I somehow missed it, so I'm writing it here again. Migration is called as movement of individuals from one place to other permanently, so that from one population they are actually eliminated out, and in the next population or whatever population they are moving into, they are added into them. So this affects the total population of two places. So from the one they're moving out is the one that will have one individual less, and the one they are moving into will have one individual more. So therefore it is divided into two categories. Immigration is when an individual actually move from its original native place to a foreign place permanently, maybe for job or maybe for anything. For example, if an Indian student scored a job in a foreign country, so now for the job, the student will now permanently move to that place in that foreign country. So he will be excluded from the population in India, but will be counted as an immigrant in that country where he is now going to reside for a period of time. So this is called immigration. And because it involves movement, its value is always subtracted from a population. So it is always negative. Whereas immigration is again opposite of immigration. So that is immigration. This is emigration. Emigration is an phenomena which is exactly opposite, like I've said. Individual move back into the original country. So for example, the student that I was talking about who's living in the foreign country has now completed the tenure of the job and now wants to come back to the native place. That would be emigration. So for developed countries, like I was talking about, this demographic transition, it's a very special phenomena because it includes two things. When the birth rate is equal to death rate. So that means that if, say, 20 children were born per year per 1,000 individual, and 20 people died per year per 1,000 individual, and the migration is 0, means the number of people that moved out and the number of people that moved in cancelled out each other. So that makes the total growth 0. There will be no increment or decrease in the total population because birth rate was equal to death rate and migration is 0. So the growth will be constant. So the population will become constant, and this is what is called as demographic transition or zero population growth. We can also understand this by looking at the human demographic transition model. This model just explains how a particular population, starts and then it moves through various stages to attain this transition. We have to understand, for any population, it's actually the highest form of development for it to achieve this transition in a way that the birth rate becomes equals to death rate. This has to be uh, it looks like that it is quite simple, but it for a level of population, this is quite a difficult task. But somehow some countries are able to manage it with their lifestyle and the type of medical services they have. So this graph over here actually explains it, that how do you reach to that point. And this graph is actually a little expansion of what you say from class 12th NCERT, but it helps to understand the concept of zero population growth. So any population, while it is getting formed, while it is getting evolving, it is divided into 5 stages. The first stage is called as high stationary, the second is early expanding, the third is late expanding, fourth is low stationary, and fifth is declining. And all these stages, we are going to compare 3 things, and those 3 things are what I'm drawing here over as a graph. So you can see that I start with a very squiggly line, and the line actually kind of then becomes a slope, and this dark black line actually becomes a curve that's moving forward upward. So this one black line is actually total population, and the red line is representing the death rate, and the green line is representing the birth rate. And on the y-axis, I'm just giving you the data of total number of birth or death or whatever I'm talking about per thousand per year, per thousand individual per year. So for every stage, I'm going to cite some examples of the existing country, and we are going to look at their birth rate and death rate and compare it in the graph, and then we will understand what can they change, or what is the reason that they belong to that particular category at this point of their growth, and also the reasons why some of them are so developed and why the other ones are not as developed as they should be. So what happens when you can what should change if you want to change the birth rate of a country, what should we change if we want to change the growth death rate of a country, so that growth of the population can change. So all those factors are compared over here for understanding, and we are going to start it one by one. So we have to understand that for high stationary, we always talk about remote regions, like some African tribes that are still very far away from technology. The second category, which was early expanding, so all the developing countries like Egypt, Kenya, India will come into that proper category. Late expanding and somehow is becoming stabilized, so Brazil would be a very good example here. And then stationary means stable, so these are those that have reached the demographic stage, and we can see that it is USA, Japan, France, UK. And the declining, where we are seeing a decline in the population. So you can see that for the high stationary, the birth rate is very high, the death rate is very high, both are very high, but the total population is actually very low. It is very less. And if we talk about the early expanding, we see that birth rate is high, but death rate has started declining. For late expanding, we see both of them are rapidly declining, but the death rate is falling more slowly because it's already quite slow. For the developed country, we see that both birth rate and death rate are very similar to each other. And for the declining one, we see that the birth rate is less than the death rate, meaning that less number of individuals are born every year, and more are dying, which is decreasing their population size, hence they are called declining. Now, understanding why there is this pattern is because the developed countries have very good medical facilities, and they have very good control over the education system, and the society is open-minded and developed, so they understand the concept of contraception. So the birth rate is controlled by that, and the death rate is under control because they have good medical facilities. But we talk about the one in the first two category. We see that children here are used in farming, and children die at an early age, and there are religious and social thought belief. There is no planning here of whatsoever type. So we see that we have a high birth rate here, and the death rate keeps declining in these areas because we get better at medical services, but it is still not enough to match up the birth rate. And that is why we see a very stark rise in the population, which we don't see when we talk about the stationary phase, because they have achieved the balance between the birth rate and the death rate because of the type of lifestyle they are living. So here I'm just writing all the reasons individually, but the overall reasons remains the same, that developing countries don't have a planned structure. They don't have a planning birth control option or planned medical services, whereas developing ones have very good birth control options and family planning. And this is the overall of this graph. So this is all about the population studies topic. The next topic would be birth control method. Thank you so much for completing this section with me. Please subscribe to my channel so you can continue in the next topic, and thank you so much for watching.